Hello, hello, Internet Universe. Welcome to the Resonant Leader. My name is Marie Deveaux, and on this channel, in this series, we like to explore leadership, communication, and inclusion through real conversations. And so I love just inviting other experts in the field of leadership and learning to chat with me about different topics. And today, I'm so excited to be joined with Ashley Johnson. Ashley is a leadership development advisor, facilitator, and coach with a solid 20 years of experience helping people grow across different sectors, largely in the nonprofit and corporate organizational space. And she's also the founder of Brightwell Leadership, where she has continued that work independently. And so we are really excited to explore today's topic on reimagining executive presence. Ashley, welcome. I'm so excited for this conversation.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Marie. I mean, the internet world should know, and if they don't already, how amazing you are. And I crossed paths with Marie at a women's leadership salon event that she runs with another woman, Catherine, where there was just such beautiful conversation and community, amazing facilitation, listening, just so much to admire. So I felt kindredness with you, and I'm so grateful to be able to talk with you today. Thank you for inviting me to be here.
Ah, I love that. So I've been chatting us up for a couple of weeks now because I do feel like executive presence is something that comes up in conversations in communities that I'm a part of quite often. And so as we start to explore this topic, I'm curious, how do you define executive presence? Like just those two words, what are we talking about?
Yeah, I think there's so many misnomers or assumptions about what executive presence is. And we even talked about this offline, how we've taught on some of these topics in our careers and about in communication and executive presence. And a lot of the times when we say that, it's coded for an interpretation of what it means to show up as a leader in a corporate space. But I think there's opportunity to reclaim what executive presence is. And I think that it is a grounded and authentic and effective way of holding space and showing up in a room. Executive presence doesn't need to be loud or deep voice or suit and tie, but I think it is something that holds space in a room and is influential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, you said so many good things already. I love that part of your definition is that it's grounded and it's effective.
Yeah.
Grounded to me feels very objective, but effective is very subjective. And so
Mm,
when I think about executive presence and the times when I've taught this topic as well, I mean, I think it just comes up so often in leadership spaces, this idea of executive presence. But I like to remind folks that everyone already has presence.
right. That's good.
Right?
Yes.
Everyone has a value, a perceived value that people receive when you walk into a room. That already exists.
Right.
When we
Right.
think about executive, it's now, is your presence doing the thing you want it to do?
Right.
Is it
Right.
effectively helping you meet your goals? And that's where I think we can really dive in and start to unpack some things around this concept, right?
Love that. Yep. Is it influencing in
Mhm.
the way that you intend? Right. Like we speak about the word executive, often with leadership, but as the person that is setting the vision or directing the path, but is influencing in a direction.
Right.
So I love what you shared there. We all have a presence. And are we achieving what we intend to with that presence? Are we influencing in the direction we intend to with that presence?
With that presence. Yeah. And then if that's part of the definition of, well, is it going where you want it to go? Well, then there's so many ways that could look, right?
Yeah.
That could feel.
Love that.
Yeah. You mentioned something about executive presence and how it has kind of taken on a very specific connotation. Can you double click on that for us a little bit?
Yes. So I think when we talk about executive presence, we can't have this conversation without talking about the word executive. And, I know this is a conversation between two leaders and new friends. And I still want to bring in the tiniest bit of data because as I was going through some of the ideas we had about what to talk about today, I was spending a little bit of time just basic Googling, researching, and found that of Fortune 500 companies, the Fortune 500, 90% of CEOs are male. Only 10% identify as female. And of those, about the same, about 90% are white.
Mhm.
And the other 10% are something other than white. I identify as a Black woman. I believe in my conversation with you, you do as well.
Mhm.
Only 2% of Fortune 500 CEOs are Black, and I don't have the data on how many of those are Black women.
Yeah.
So when you think about literally the word executive, chief executive officer in corporate, it has a very specific demographic just based on what the data shows of who's in those roles right now. Therefore, the norms around how we expect somebody to show up or how we imagine their presence is going to achieve an outcome is shaped around a certain demographics experience. In this case, white men are
Yeah.
the majority of the executives, and that's the majority of the presence that we experience and what we equate as effective because
Mhm.
that's what they see in those roles.
Right. Yeah. And it's just so interesting, this idea that just because that's what we experience all the time doesn't mean that's what's effective for everyone.
Right, right.
Right. It's really interesting, this idea. I know I recently was coaching an executive around this concept, like thinking about presence. And one of the things that this female leader was really struggling with was wanting to move up in her organization. But when she looked at that next tier of executive leadership, she did
Yeah,
not align with the prevailing culture. She was like, it's
right.
very aggressive. People argue in meetings. There's a lot of talking over each other.
Oh,
All things that I would, describe as really kind of verbal violence, like people trying to
yeah,
overpower with the use of their voice and their stature
yeah.
and the way they take up space. And she said, I don't know if I want to be a leader if that's the culture that I have to assimilate
Mm,
to.
mhm, mhm.
And so it does become this challenge of, if there is a particular culture, right, that is
Right,
embodying all of the executive presence that you see, but that is not the culture that you align with, where does that
right,
leave you in terms of your own professional development and growth trajectory?
right, right. I have to share a small story if that's okay with you.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Um, that brings up like a visceral response to me because I had a similar experience when I first transitioned from the nonprofit space into the corporate space. I did a couple of years in management consulting, and I came from a background in social work, people development, but very much listening centric.
Mhm.
People, it's letting other folks tell their stories and me attempting to hear and collaborate and respond to what I'm hearing in order to develop a solution. So I brought that same mindset, which felt very values aligned to me, into the corporate space. And I would go into these meetings with other consultants, sitting back, listening, wanting to digest what I was hearing before I contributed something. And I was never able to speak because the culture and the environment there was exactly what you're saying. It was everybody spoke over each other, competition to get the first word in, make sure that you sound smart. And in doing that, like we weren't that effective in achieving the best outcomes. But I remember feeling a sense of pressure to get my voice into the room faster because that's what I was seeing around me, and that's what was being rewarded as, effective or as, quote, "executive presence."
Yeah.
And that didn't resonate with what I felt was authentic to me and how I liked to show up. And when I tried it on, it just it didn't feel like it what you said at the beginning, it didn't feel like it moved me towards what I intended.
Mhm. Yeah, that story, that example resonates quite a lot. I think about all of the times that, folks have said, "Oh, well, executive presence," and we've talked about this too, but this idea of, like, having a deep and very loud voice, projecting, talking a lot, the very gregarious personality, all of those things, which just again kind of points to this idea that the loudest voice in the room is going to be the best, right?
Right.
And yet still, if we're talking about executive, the thing that's most effective, we have to remember just because something is noisy doesn't mean it's working.
Absolutely. So,
And,
so true. I
you
don't know if
know,
you've read that book, Quiet by, I think it's
Susan
Susan.
Cain.
Yeah, but
Yes.
about introverted leadership. And there's even data that actually says that introverts are more effective leaders than extroverts, which is not to say that we should try to be one or the other, but to just make the point that what we prop up as effective or as this ideal of executive presence, boisterous, loud, outspoken, may not always be the most effective way of leading, in particular, if it's not authentic to you and if it's not helpful in the context in which you're in.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest part too, right? What's effective is always contextual. And that depends on the problem, the situation, the environment, the people, their background, the experience, the relationships, the interpersonal like there's so much that goes into what's going to be effective. And I know we had even chatted a little bit about really thinking about context and where that plays into this idea of executive presence. What are your thoughts on context as we think about leadership and executive presence? How important is context?
I do think that it matters. So, okay, I was thinking about this earlier. In our authenticity, like, I don't think that it's enough for us to say, I'm just who I am. And that means I'm being authentic. And therefore, I will never make any changes to the way in which I show up because I don't want to be inauthentic. The context that you're in may require something different from you. And I think that that's just a part of two things. On like the human side, it's just a part of being human and understanding that there are other people that come from different backgrounds and different cultures and different experiences. And therefore, there might be something within myself that I need to translate in order to reach that person where they're at.
Yeah.
And then outside of even just the human piece, from like the actual kind of leadership piece, there's that situational awareness as well of we have to have the emotional intelligence as leaders to understand I can still be myself, my authentic self, but I need to know what's required in this moment. An example I'll give you is I grew up in a family that highly values sarcasm and humor. Like I love dry humor. I love a good joke. I will crack jokes almost all the time. And I've had to learn, honestly, that that's not always helpful in some situations when I'm working with people that are highly analytical, very serious, don't that they just don't they didn't grow up in that way. They don't necessarily have an appreciation for that. That tactic can actually be a distraction from moving the conversation forward. So I'm not being inauthentic by holding back some of my desire to laugh or make jokes, but I am having some situational awareness to say, okay, based on who's here and what's happening right now, that might not be the shade of myself to represent this moment. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's not still something I value. I'm just like aware of who I'm with right now and what is needed to move the needle.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you're raising this. It has me thinking about code switching.
Yeah, yeah.
um, because code switching, I think, is part of this like both and the kind of two sides of this coin that we're kind of talking about here, right? There is, if you want to be effective, it is in your benefit to speak many different dialects and to be intercultural
Mm,
and know how to speak in the language, the dialect, the context that someone else can hear,
yeah,
right? That is part of good communication. That is part of emotional awareness and intercultural awareness, right? Being able to communicate with people across cultures and experiences is a skill.
yeah.
And I think there are times if and when, right, you are not a part of the dominant culture where you spend a lot of your time flexing into someone else's culture, flexing into the dominant culture, speaking in their language, what's comfortable for them in their context. And
Yeah.
that, I think, becomes really burdensome, especially when that deference does not get reciprocated.
Yes. Yes. I am like glowing at resonating with what you're saying, because I think that's the key is there reciprocation?
Right.
There's a difference between translating yourself to reach another person, or that person doing the same for you, and assimilating
Mm-hmm.
to the space in which you're in, because there is no effort being made on the other side.
Right.
I think, and when you talk about the cost of code switching and of conforming, again, I think, to me personally, because code switching is a charged word, like phrase, just based on my experience, I associate that as something different than a, self-aware, smart, strategic, emotionally intelligent, dialing up or down of the way in which you show up. I think code switching is really more, I'm having to conform as a
Mm-hmm.
means of survival, as
Right.
a means of being minimally seen. Sometimes it's there's repercussions if you aren't sort of falling in line into that dominant culture, and it does come at a significant cost. I don't think I told you this, but I wrote my I studied leadership in grad school, and I wrote my capstone about the differentiated experience of microaggressions towards Black women, and how within the workspace, because you're having to deal with some of these pieces and code switch constantly every day, there's significant physical, mental, and emotional health outcomes, like
Right.
distal outcomes, that Black women experience because of how different it is. I think about when I worked at, well, say names, but I've worked at some very large household name organizations. And in some of those spaces, everybody had straight hair that went like this, like not curls like this,
Right.
like straight hair that was barrel rolled down, like
Very specific.
very specific. And I spent years straightening my hair because there were very few women of color, and the women of color that were there all straightened their hair. And think about, like, that literally took hours and
Hours.
energy and time, and then it would rain and my hair would be freezing. Like, all of this
Right.
mental load going to something that has nothing to do with me showing up as a leader. But if I didn't do it, people would be distracted by my curly hair that's different from yours, and not fully taking in what I have to offer as a leader. So anyways, I feel like I'm getting up
Yep.
on a
Well,
soapbox.
but I think this is a really important thing, though. And I see, like, I love our good friend Ruby Brown Herring is in the chat. She's like, "Oh my gosh, it's so exhausting," because it
Yes.
is, and there is a cost to constantly having to do this
Yeah.
assimilation work, right? And to that end, it's, if you're having to do that, are you really being authentic? If you are spending that much time and energy and mental capacity
Right,
just trying to fit into what someone else's normal is
right,
that actually making you more effective as a leader, or is that actually distracting you from your goals, right?
right. I can't imagine that. I mean, my experience and what I've observed in others, the energy that takes directly away from our capacity to think strategically, from our critical thinking skills, from our ability to navigate relationships. All of the other areas that require our brain power are kind of like sucked away
Right.
by the energy that we're spending assimilating. And I think it's a tough question that we have to ask ourselves, because sometimes we're in environments where this way the system is set up doesn't allow for a lot of other expressions of executive
Mhm.
while also being rewarded. Sometimes my experience, and I'm curious yours too, has been I can choose to show up in what feels like a more authentic expression, in my executive presence, and still be effective. But sometimes that doesn't always come with reward or with
Mhm.
promotion.
Right. Well, this is, I mean, well, this is the thing about culture, right? right? Because if we're really looking at culture, we're talking about what are the ways of being that are valued in this particular group.
Right.
And you can come from a different culture and have different values and different ways of being that are perceived as more valuable in your culture than they are in the culture that you are working in.
Right.
And that, I think, does create real friction, a little bit of, identity crisis for people,
Mm.
especially if we're thinking about a very Western, very United Statesian context, where so much of USA and work culture is around your identity being wrapped up in what you do for a living and your work. That is
Yeah, that's a good
such a
point.
huge part of the culture. Like, you join a company and everyone knows you by your title. That's how you introduce yourself on the weekends, is by
Right.
what you do, right?
Right.
And so I think it kind of comes with this expectation that you then adopt the culture of whatever company you work for,
Mm.
which for a good amount of corporate USA and workplaces is going to be a very masculine type of culture. It's going to be very white European centric. Um,
Yeah.
those are the customs, the values, the hairstyles, the lingo that are valued and seen as the best, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
everything else is less than, right? To your point of, look at the Fortune 500 CEO list.
Yeah.
Who is valued in that system? It is very clear. The
Right.
demographic, right? The physical attributes that are valued in our system. So I think it does make it really difficult for people to choose themselves when there aren't necessarily rewards for being yourself.
Right. Right.
Well, not material rewards.
Intrinsic. Yeah. And, I do think that over time, with more evidence of how alternate expressions, whether it's just even introducing other cultural norms of leadership. Like I think back to leadership studies and expressions of communal leadership that can be really highly effective. Like one of the number one problems that that people come to us as leadership professionals about is dysfunction on a team, or people
Mhm.
are operating in silos. And it's because we in our Western culture, we have propped up individualism so highly, we don't know how to operate as a collective. So if we can begin to integrate other ways of success, like I wonder what that does for beginning to see that there are alternate ways to bring executive presence and to be effective. I think about some of the work that I've done with teams, and to be clear, no country or region of the world is a monolith. So this is not everybody, but some of the work that I've experienced with folks includes a lot more community orientation, a lot more deferring to one another, a lot more time and silence and quiet. It's not so much boisterous and loudness. So I think about that too. Like what would happen if we were to decenter not just, a white male persona of leadership, but also an individualistic idea of success. I might be taking us way too off track, Marie, but that's
No,
just
I love a
what.
side quest. But this is something I am constantly thinking about. And I know even before, we hit the live button, we were talking about some other leaders here in North Carolina who are hosting a salon at the end of September around many of these themes, really exploring culture and community through a more feminine lens, which tends to be more collective centered versus individualistic, which tends to have more flattened power dynamics, really looking at more of that introspection versus constant extroversion in terms of energetic output. And
Mm,
I do think there is room for that and a need for that in a lot of where we are right now.
yeah.
I was in conversation with someone last week, and we're just talking about the ways of the world right now, the state of the world, and how we have just swung the pendulum so far over in terms of um, bigotry, in terms of violence in all of its forms, in terms of people really divorcing themselves from their
Mhm.
emotional body, right?
Wow.
And trying to lead with their head. And he's like, I'm really hoping we're going to start swinging back soon. And I think all of us are really waiting for the pendulum to start swinging back because there is, I think, a very palpable recognition that we are way too far indexed on this one side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And to your point, like it's not about introverts are better, extroverts are better, but more about can we be more intentional about using the breadth of tools available to fit the context of the situation?
Right. Right. I think that so one of the definitions of servant leadership that I really appreciate comes from Robert Greenleaf. And he says that a servant leader thinks about, do I help those around me to become healthier, wiser, and freer versions of themselves? In order to do that, like I just keep coming back to this concept of the breadth of humanity. We have within ourselves a way of showing up, experiences, upbringings, strengths, all of those things that comprise who we are. And we get to interact with all different kinds of people. And so, in order to be effective, like I'm almost talking myself out of the idea that there even is an executive presence that can be taught or coached, because in order to be effective, like you really have to be able to see the people in front of you and understand how to dial those things to influence
Yeah.
others.
Yeah. Well, I think, well, going back to this definition of presence, everyone already has presence. But if we
Yeah.
think about all of the ways the word presence is used, it's about being where you are, right?
Mm, yeah.
Can you be where you are and can you meet people where they are?
Yeah.
That is always going to be the most effective thing. Whenever I'm always struck by folks who have had their first encounter with coaching and they're kind of waiting for you to like fix them
Hmm.
or tell them what to do. And I'm like, oh, that's not the conversation we're about to have.
Right. Yeah.
Because so much of what happens in coaching conversations and in using coaching as a tool for leadership is helping someone find their own answers,
Yes.
which is that is emotional intelligence, that's self-awareness and self-regulation, that's also critical thinking skills to
Right.
be able to analyze the data and the context of a situation in the moment where you are and make a decision where you actually can trust yourself in that decision.
Yeah.
So when I think about executive presence, it's the people who have somehow found a way to do a lot of that real-time self-awareness, social awareness work,
That's
right?
amazing. I am having like a light bulb moment as you're describing that definition. I think we don't see a lot of that
We don't
in
see
we don't see a
we
lot of
don't.
examples of that in the
We are in
leaders
a
that.
leadership crisis, my friend.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't think we can get through an episode without mentioning how AI is ruining our critical thinking capacity.
Yeah.
But literally, there are studies now that are showing us that for the first time in generations, uh, Gen Z has less cognitive ability than the generation before them,
Really?
which they can directly attribute to screen time and screen time being introduced into educational systems.
Wow.
Right. So something is happening where we are not leveraging the same parts of our brain that we used to in order to engage in a relationship, in a conversation, to solve problems. We are more and more outsourcing a lot of those thinking jobs to our
Yeah.
technological tools. And there is a cost for that. Right.
Yeah.
Again, going back to when you say effective, what does effective mean? Right.
Right.
Is
Right.
it is more, better, faster always effective? Right.
Right.
Or
No.
is right? No,
Right.
the answer is no, no. But I
No.
think there's something to this idea. Like as a leader, what are you trying to do?
Yeah. I would that now that is the conversation around how do we rather than us trying to train leaders, or if we are leaders, aspiring leaders ourselves, trying to contort ourselves into a version, an image of a person that, speaks deeply and loudly and with sweeping hand motions.
Mhm.
You know, folks come to us asking for training in executive presence with this thought that we will just show you the way of how to be, but it's really more how to think than how to be. That's what I'm hearing from you. And I really appreciate that insight, how to see others and then how to think
And how to
to
think.
adjust and lead
Yeah.
them.
And I think another component of this too is how to listen, right?
How
And
to,
really hear what people are telling you.
yeah,
And that's where I
resonate.
think a lot of that intercultural fluency comes in of like, do you actually know how to
Mm,
hear people across cultures, across
right.
experiences? Which is a skill you cultivate by getting into more and more relationship with more and more different people, right?
Yeah.
Which is, again, something that I think people are doing less and less of in our current state of affairs, right? There's a lot of fear of other, and that
Right.
is, I think, only handicapping us further in terms of how we be together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In these spaces, I am grateful for folks like you that are still doing the work to, and I've witnessed you doing this, so I've seen it happen, but still doing the work to listen and to model what true executive presence looks like.
Oh, well, I hope so. And that's why I like to stay in communication with people like you who are out here doing the work. I like to say all of us are just chipping away at our little corner of the world, doing the work that
Yeah,
we can. And if enough
yeah,
enough of us are doing that work, we can cover the globe together. So
that's right.
uh, we are at time.
We have so much more to say, but I love talking to you. It's so
I
I
know,
like
it's
I
so good.
you inspire me to think bigger and deeper, and I really appreciate that.
Same, likewise. I tell people if I could just read books and have good conversations all day, that would be my life. So
Yeah.
come on, universal basic income.
So much
But
fun.
to everyone who's watching, thank you so much for joining us. Ruby, I see you. I appreciate you. I love you. And for everyone else who's joined us, thank you so much for in joining us for this conversation. If something resonated with you, if this hits you in your feels, we would love to hear about it. Please leave a comment, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Go start conversations on your own. And of course, this is a YouTube channel. So do the things you know how to do, like and subscribe, do all of those things, because it does help ideas like this circulate and be out in the world. But that is all for today. Signing off for now, and I'll be back here next week. I'll be joined by Michelle Marquardt Deveaux, who is a classically trained opera singer and voice coach. And we're going to be talking about the physiological manifestations of voice and the power of your voice. I'm really excited for that conversation. But this is all for now. Please make sure you find Ashley out on the internet streets. You can connect with her on LinkedIn. She would love to be in communication and conversation with all of you beautiful humans. But that is all for now. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on The Resonant Leader.
All right.